Amen. Well, I'm Chuck Eastman. I'm the campus pastor down in Conway. I haven't been down here in a while. You may not recognize me. Something happened to my face over the last few months. I'm just going to put a few rumors to rest. One of which is I am not competing with Kai for the best beard at Mosaic. I am not competing. I'm way ahead. It was not a competition. I won a long time ago. Buddy Kai over here. The other rumor I want to put to rest is I have not joined an Amish community. I know that you may have thought that things have changed in my religious background. I have not joined an Amish community, and I cannot chop wood. I don't want anybody to think that I can chop wood. I'm just wearing this shirt. Somebody gave it to me over Thanksgiving. They said, you should wear that. It would go good with your beard. I've never worn a flannel shirt before, actually. But, you know, when your sister gives you a shirt, you wear it because she knows better than you. So that's what's going on this morning. Just a few rumors that I just want you to get led astray, okay, this morning. Man, I'm so glad to be here. It's exciting to be here. It feels different to be here. I don't think I've missed a Sunday in Conway since I started down there in August. And so it's a little bit different. It'll feel a little bit out of rhythm to be here with you guys. But it's so good to see familiar faces, to see my kids over here, my youth. Good to see you guys. You guys are rocking it over there with Kai, I know. I love you guys. You know, since I've been in Conway, you know, we've had some older folks in the church that have passed away. It's, you know, it's an interesting thing, but just in the few months that I've been there, we've had some older folks that have passed. And about a month ago, one of those older ladies, the sweetest Christian lady in the world, named Miss Bessie King, she passed away from cancer. And I didn't know her real well when I got out there. I didn't know anybody very well when I got out there. And I got out there, and about a month before she passed away, she was told, and we were told as a church, that there was nothing more they could do. She was going to die. She knew it. The doctors knew it. We knew it. I mean, her time had come, and she was an older lady and lived an awesome life. But there was this moment of just waiting. Maybe you guys have been in moments like that where, you know, the verdict has come down. It's going to happen. It's just a waiting game. And being a young and still young, inexperienced pastor, I didn't know, you know, what do? You know, it's someone in your church, and like, hey, probably a month. You're like, okay, like, what am I supposed to do here? And the only thing I've ever read in the manual is, you know, you go visit people, okay? There's not a lot in the manual after that. It's like, you know, you go visit people. So I started making a visit once a week as we just played out this waiting game. I went to visit Miss Bessie, and I didn't know her at all, but I knew she was passing, and so I went to visit her with no idea what I would say, no idea how I would comfort her, no idea how I would challenge her and love her well. I just knew I needed to go there, and I needed to be there, and so I started making these visits, and I would drive up, and I would go in there, and I would hang out with her. And, man, you know, those few moments, sometimes they were just for like 25 or 30 minutes. And I did it once a week for about 3 weeks, for about a month. Actually, about just really 4 visits. And, you know, they were so intimate. They were so real. And in those minutes, and the short time that I could carve out of my busy schedule to just sit and to be with her, she just shared her life with me. She shared stories with me of crazy things that had happened in her life, and amazing ways that God had spoken to her, and amazing ways that she had lived. And it just seemed like every moment, I'd get back in my car, and I would be like, I was only in there for 20 minutes. But it was just maximized. It was powerful, and it was rich, and every word was just so real in those last hours and days of her life, and it was just so intimate. And that's the kind of intimacy that we're stepping into as we're in John these days. See, we started 13 a couple weeks ago, and it's the upper room discourse. It's the night that Jesus was betrayed. And as we read through this, it's going from 13 all the way to chapter 17. And it's just this intimate dinner with his closest friends. And it's going to be so intimate, and there's going to be lots of confusion being discussed, and there's going to be lots of pain, and there's going to be like sorrow, and there's going to be some anger, and there's going to be some accusations said. Because Jesus knows his hour has come, and he's going to lay it all out there. It's really a beautiful section of Scripture that we're just kind of getting into, and it's just that intimate, these last hours. What would you say in your last hours to your closest friends? What would you communicate about what it meant to follow you? If you were the God of the universe, what would you communicate about? Here's who I am, and here's what I'm doing, and here's what I want you to be about. What would you say in these most intimate moments of your life with your friends? And that's where we're at this morning. We're in the second part of John 13, but just to set the stage for that, just so you get the intimacy of the room this morning, in John 13, verse 1, Jesus says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own that were in the world, he loved them to the end." That's some of you guys, that's all you needed this morning. Seriously. Some of you guys can pack up and go home. All you needed to know this morning is Jesus hasn't stopped loving you. He hasn't slowed down. Nothing's blocking his love from you. I don't care where you're at. I don't care what you're going through. I don't care what kind of circumstances are happening right now. Jesus loves his own, and he's going to love them, and he loves them to the end. And that's what he says here, and it's the setting for the intimacy. It's the setting for everything that he's going to do from 13 all the way to 17. These are his own, and he loves them, and he loves them intimately. And he's never stopped, and he won't stop. In fact, you find out later, he goes, and even though I'm going and you're freaking out about it, but I'm going to send the Comforter because I love you to the end, and I'm going to keep loving you to the very end till you see me again. Jesus loves his own, and he loves them to the end. And then the second framework for this whole chapter is during the supper, the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. In fact, we know from the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that Judas has already gone to the council. He has already gone to them before the Last Supper, and he's already agreed to take money, and he's already agreed to find a secret place that he can get Jesus arrested. So he's already going to do it. And Jesus knows that. And it's not like Jesus just woke up one day and knew before the Last Supper that Judas was going to do what he's going to do. No, even if you go back to John 6, when a bunch of disciples left Jesus, not his 12, but a bunch of other ones left him, he looked to his 12 and he said in John 6, he said, "Are you going to leave too?" And they said, "Where would we go?" And he goes, "That's right, because you belong to me, except one of you is a devil." Talking about Judas. So Judas has been allowed to hang out with Jesus. The enemy's been allowed to smell his breath, to eat meals with him, to walk with him, to hear his teaching, to be in his most intimate moments. Okay, so that's the other setting for our passage today. And then the last setting in verse 3, and then we'll jump to our text today. In verse 3, all of this is set up by Jesus knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand. That's all control. That's all power. That's all authority. All things are in Jesus' hands. And that he'd come from God. In other words, he knew who he was. And he was going back to God. In other words, he knew his destiny. Everything Jesus does comes from the confidence of knowing he's in control. This is his plan that he's purposing. He's calling it to be. Right? That should give us a lot of confidence, because our God is not up there like if nothing's like it's all out of his control, all this chaotic world that's around us, and we go, man, it's all out of control. No, he's going, no, all authority's in my hand. I'm in control. I'm powerful. I'm moving. And he knows exactly who he is. He knows where he's come from. and he knows exactly what his destiny is. See, when you know who you are and you know where you're going, it gives you an incredible confidence to do everything you know you're supposed to do. How else do you face a bloody cross? How else do you go through the most painful experience a human being can experience? You're going to have skin ripped off your back. You're going to have your face pummeled till people can't recognize you anymore. Your clothes stripped away in the most humiliating fashion possible. How can you do that unless you know where you're going? And you know where you come from. And you know that it's your purpose to start with. Not something you just fell into. This was your plan. That's how you do it. And that's the framework for our text this morning. Because what he does right after that is he does the unthinkable. And Mark talked about this a few weeks ago. He takes the lowest place of a servant. It's an echo of Philippians 2, where he being the king, the Lord, in quality with God, but he didn't grasp it, but he humbled himself and became obedient. What did he do? He took the nature of a servant, and he began to wash their feet, the nastiest part of their body, the grossest place. No Jew would have been allowed to do. No Jew would let another Jew wash their feet. No, that was the place for the lowest servant. You'd let a Gentile do it, right? And Jesus gets down. He derobes freely, which is ironic because later at the cross, the clothes are ripped from his body. But there's a message. All authority is in my hand. I know where I've come from and I know where I'm going. This robe that I take off to get down and do the nasty work of making you clean and washing your feet, I do that freely. Don't get it twisted, brothers. When you see my clothes ripped off from me, nobody made me do that. I did it of my own free will. And that's what happened. And so he got down and he washed their feet, right? And then Peter had this crazy thing like, hey, you can't wash my feet, because he thinks he's like better than that. No, I'm here to serve you, God. No, I signed up. You need me on your team, don't you? And then we get the whole turn on its head of religion, which is Jesus said, you can't serve me. I came to serve you. And I came to serve you to put you in motion to serve others. Isn't that what the gospel is? The gospel is not, hey, you can come serve me. This is great. That'll be a much better life. You come serve me. It's you couldn't serve me. I came to serve you. And in serving you, I put you into motion. That's the gospel. And that's what Jesus did when he washed their feet. Then we come to verse 18. He says he's made them clean, but I'm not speaking of all of you. I know whom I've chosen. He's talking of the disciples. But the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. In other words, there's a traitor here. He's quoting Psalms 41, by the way. In Psalms 41, he's quoting David in Psalms 41, where David says, a close friend who has eaten with me has lifted his heel against me. See, Jesus knew Judas is the devil, but yet he allowed him into that space as a close friend. Well, why is that? Well, he tells us, so that the scripture would be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I'm telling you this now before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am. Your English Bible says, I am he, but it's just I am. Ego eimi. That's the little phrase for I am. It's the same phrase that the rabbis use to translate Exodus 3:11. When it says, when Moses saw the burning bush, and he says, who do I say that you are? And he goes, I am that I am. Ego eimi. Ego eimi. And John loves that phrase. He loves to just stick it in places. When you do this, you'll see, I am. When this happens, you'll know, I am. He just loves it because he wants the reader to see over and over and over and over again, everything I'm doing is to peel back the veil from your eyes, to pull back the blinders of your eyes and see, this is who I am. This is why I'm here. So I'm telling you this. I've allowed the enemy into my circle. I've allowed the enemy to sit at my table. And I've even gotten down in the most humble position and washed my enemy's feet. Why? Because the mission's more important than my enemy. And my enemy is actually a part of my mission. You know, a lot of times we feel like we've got enemies. We've got forces working against us. I just want you to know there is no enemy coming after you that God's not using for his purpose at the end of the day. There isn't anything coming after you. There isn't anything attacking you, anything pushing down on you that at the end of the day that God's not in total control over and is working out for his own purpose. The devil can't do nothing. He can't sneeze without Jesus saying, this is where we're going. Yeah, he's working against God, but he can't do anything without God's permission. And here he is. The devil's been close and he's watching. You know, just as a little bit of an aside, I kind of went on a little rant about this in Conway, and I won't do that this morning, but you know, it's really interesting. See, the mission's so big to Jesus. His purpose is so big, right, that he's allowed the enemy close, and he's allowed the enemy there, and he's washed the enemy's feet, right? He's let the enemy get so close to him for the sake of the mission. You know, it just makes me think, does the mission matter that much to us? And the reason I say that is I've been kind of been out of shape by the whole Syrian refugee thing. There's 10,000, maybe more Muslim refugees that want to come to our doorstep. In other words, we used to have to spend thousands of dollars to like send people to like Muslim countries to tell them the good news about Jesus. And now starving, hungry ones want to be in your neighborhood. They want to be close to you. And they're starving and they're hurting and they're poor. And we have the opportunity to love them. And somebody goes, well, what if one comes through who's a terrorist? What if one fanatic sneaks through and blows up a school or blows up a church? And you know, I was having this discussion at home over Thanksgiving, and somebody in my family said, what if your sister, because I know my sister's like, we're close. What if your sister got blown up? And I think Jesus, if we ask that question to Jesus, he'd look at it and go, and? I didn't come on planet Earth to be safe. And I didn't put people on a mission of safety. Safety was never part of the equation. So the government's got its deal. It needs to work, and it's there, and has a military, and it's supposed to work to keep its people safe. And I get all that, but the people of God need to be for other people. And to do whatever we can to say, hey, if the mission is bigger than my safety, I'm just saying. That may make somebody uncomfortable. I'm not trying to be political. I just want to care about people. I don't want to be at the other side facing Jesus and go, hey, my safety was more important than a bunch of starving Muslims who could have felt me say, hey, I saw Jesus when I saw you starving. I saw Jesus when you were naked. I saw Jesus when I want to be on that end. I don't want to be like the Pharisee who's seeking to justify his own opinion when Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. And he goes, who's my neighbor? I don't want to be that guy. Who's my neighbor? It's just so technical to me. Is my neighbor, who is it? No, I want to be on the side that says, hey, we were there. And you know what? And somebody might sneak in. Is the mission more important? Is the mission more important than the safety of your kids? It's just food for thought. Jesus washed the feet of his enemy, and he was close to them. And then there's this tension. Jesus says, you'll know that I am he. In other words, you'll believe, you'll see that I am who I say. When all this comes to pass, you'll see me for who I am. And then he says, and a man, or truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I send receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. There's an immediate connection to mission. You're going to see me for who I am when everything I say comes true, and then you're going to go. And those who receive you receive me. We're going to come back to that theme in a second because it's followed up and fleshed out later in the chapter. And after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray. I want you to know this. Jesus isn't just going, he's not just floating through the night. His spirit is troubled. His close friend is at the table, and his close friend is his betrayer. Truly, Truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. Jesus was troubled in his spirit. And the disciples, this does not have a calming effect, by the way. You're sitting with your 12 bros, and you get really troubled, and you're just torn up inside, and you go, truly, truly, I say, one of you is going to betray me. You're going to stab me in the back. Well, they start kind of looking at each other. You read the other Gospels, they actually individually, Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about individually. They actually start asking Jesus, is it me? With a real, I don't know. And it says they were very sorrowful if you read those other accounts. This statement did not, go over well with them. It created a very tense room. Every one of them had to come to grips with the capacity of their own heart. Do you know the capacity of your heart? Do you understand the depth of your own heart? When you hear the story of Adam and Eve and those who crucified Christ, you go, man, it's so hard for me to get into that because I just can't imagine, if it was up to me, I'd have never ate that apple. And if Jesus was the guy he'd done, if he'd heal people and they were blind, there's no way I'd have been on the team that said crucify him. Or don't you know you could have been in the inner circle, you could have been in the inner room, you could have been close to Jesus at every step of the way, and your heart, because of the evil, dark sin that we're born into, has the capacity. And that moment, every one of them knew it. Is it I? Is it I? Is it me? And they were very sorrowful as they came to grips with their own dark heart. So much so that Peter kind of, they got to get an answer. So he motions to the one Jesus loves. I love how John refers to himself. That's not humble at all. Jesus motioned to him. The one whom Jesus loved was reclining. I love how he has that special position next to Jesus. He's reclining at the table at Jesus' side. He motions to him to ask him of whom he was speaking, and that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said, Lord, who is it? Peter's probably thinking, well, maybe there's one guy in here who knows for sure he would never do that. Maybe it's the one he loves, How let that guy ask? Who is it? And Jesus answered, "It's to him who I give this morsel of bread when I've dipped it." So when he dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him, and Jesus said to him, "What you're going to do quickly." Why? Because Jesus isn't this guy out here just looking for pain. He knows it's going to hurt, and he wants it to happen quickly. He's not Superman. He's a human being. His spirit is troubled. He knows pain is on its way. He knows that that things are going to hurt. Do it quickly, Judas. Let's get this over with. And then, after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him, and Jesus said to him, "What are you going to do quickly?" Now, no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So there's all this confusion. It's like they weren't listening. It's like they went from this moment of is it me? Is it me? Who is it? Is it me? And Jesus is finally all right, let me tell you who it is. I'm going to give the bread to him. And they're like, why did he just leave? That seems really weird, unless you grew up with a bunch of boys like I did. If you spent a lot of your life just around a bunch of dudes, that's not as weird as it would seem, because we're just more dense. You ladies would have picked it up. You'd have been like, oh yeah, I read that the whole way. But sometimes guys are just like, What are we talking about? Did someone going to betray somebody? Well, what are you doing? Where did you go, Judas? It's just, it's I don't think John's trying to make a point here. I just think he's saying these guys aren't as smart as maybe the average person. Which is why later in Acts it says people were amazed when they did all these miracles. Why? Because they were common and uneducated. That's who's sitting in the room. These are not your scholars. Great in discourse and audience analysis. They're kind of confused. So after receiving the morsel, he immediately went out, and it was night. And in all this confusion, Jesus changes the focus of the conversation. And when he had gone out, Jesus says, now, and that's a reference all the way back to 13:1. Now, when Jesus knew his hour had come, it says, now is the Son of Man glorified. That means his greatness put on display. And God is glorified. God's greatness is glorified, put on display in him. And if God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself. That seems like a lot of double talk. Here's the main part of the message. God's going to get a lot of glory out of Jesus at the cross. The cross is the pinnacle moment of Jesus and God saying, here we are, here's what we're like, here's what we do, know me now. Nothing else screams out who God is in his power and his glory and his beauty and his holiness and his justice and his love than the cross. Nothing even comes close. Not creation, not any acts of service that we can do. Everything pales in comparison to the glory and a revelation of Jesus and a revelation of God and his character than the cross. It is the pinnacle and the blazing center of who God is and God's heart for humanity. And that's what Jesus is saying. I love how the Message says this. It says, when he had left, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is seen for who he is. And God is seen for who he is in him. And the moment God is seen in him, God's glory will be put on display. In glorifying him, he himself is glorified. Glory all around. The cross is God finally going, you know, I've been working through history. I've created everything. I've talked through the prophets. I've told you about myself. I've told you about the way that I act, and I've told you about the way I want you to live and all this stuff. But the cross is the final coming through and saying, hey, listen, no more doubt about who I am and what I'm like. I'm right here. The cross is that place, the pinnacle of the glory and the beauty and the awesomeness of God. And what's crazy is that's where our community finds its place. That's where our community finds its place. It's rooted in the blazing center of God's glory. Check out what happens next. He goes, little children, let a little while I am with you. You will seek me. And just as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. In other words, I'm going to die and you can't come with me. A new commandment I give you. Look at this. I'm about to be glorified. I'm about to put my glory on display where people finally see me for what I am and who I am and what I'm like, the way I love and the way I'm just, the way I save, the way I forgive, and the way I deal with sin. But to see with me, see all that I am. And what's rooted in that? A new commandment I give you. See, the gospel is what? You can't serve me. I came to serve you and put you into motion. And that's exactly what happens here. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another just as, not in some nebulous love one another. What does that mean? No, just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. You know, I struggled with that for a little while because I was like, that's not a new commandment. Anybody think that when you read that? Like, no, and that's been like all over the Bible, right? Like, that's all over the New Testament, right? In Deuteronomy 6, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. That's the greatest commandment. Then Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself. So when Jesus runs into the young rich ruler, or the big religious guy, and he says, you know, hey, what's the greatest commandment? He goes, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. This doesn't seem like a new thing unless you don't understand what love is. Unless your definition of love is broken and twisted and self-centered. See, if your definition of love is off, then this is a brand new commandment, and that's where the just as comes in. Just as. Why is it a new commandment? Because you've never seen the just as, friends. Until Jesus showed up on the scene, no one had ever seen the just as. They'd heard the commandment. They'd heard the love the Lord your God with all your heart. They'd heard the love your neighbor as yourself, but they'd never seen the just as. They'd never seen the humbling king become a servant and then say, now you go do what I did. Just as I did for you, go. Right? They never saw the Jesus. They never saw what's love. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church, as he laid his life down for her. Just as. Just as. That's why it's a new commandment, because nobody had ever seen the just as before. And now all of a sudden doubt is pulled away. How am I supposed to love my neighbor? Oh, let me show you. You're supposed to get down in the lowest possible place. And do the nastiest, humbling thing you can do, and let go of every title you've gotten and get down in the mud and dirt and serve at the expense of everything that you've got. And you're supposed to die for others, constantly putting their needs before you, constantly letting go of your rights, constantly thinking, what could I do to love and to serve at the expense of my own needs? Just as. That's a new commandment. And it all flows out of the cross. It all flows out of God going, I'm about to be seen like I've never been seen before. It puts us into motion. It doesn't put us into motion to serve God and do something for God. It puts us into motion to show others God. And that's exactly what it says, right? Just as I've loved you, love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you're also to love one another. By this, all people will what? Will know. Isn't that amazing connection? I'm about to be seen like I've never been seen before, glorified in a way I've never been glorified like. And now if you love each other just as, what's the byproduct? Then people will know you belong to me. You just become a mere reflection. You're not doing anything for God. You're letting who he is reflect through you. He's done everything for us, and he's put us into motion to reflect him. And that's the whole gospel, and that's the whole Christian life. It's the DNA of Christian community, and it's the heartbeat of real discipleship. Because it's way, way harder, and actually way more simple, than showing up to church and running through a bunch of religious duties. It cuts through all of that. It cuts through all of that and says, do you see the cross and do you mirror the cross? Do you see the cross and do you mirror the cross? Do you see the cross and do you mirror the cross? Do people see the cross in you? Husbands and wives? Do people see the cross in you with the way you serve your neighbors? Do people see the cross in you the way you serve your coworkers? Do people see the cross in you, parents, with the way you serve your kids? You call me Lord and teacher, but I'm serving, I'm washing your feet. Do your kids know that about you, mom and dad? Do our lives mirror the cross? Because every time Jesus talks about his death, he flips the script and says, now go and do likewise. Now you go do the example I gave you. You know, Peter, he just ain't smart, though. And he just seems to miss the whole thing. And you get to verse 36, and he goes, Lord, where are you going? I mean, if I was Jesus, I'd slapped him. And, you know, I used to have a thing about that when I was in college. I won't go into that, but I used to slap a bunch of people in college. I don't know why. It was just, I don't know, it was just kind of fun. But I used to, the best thing was to surprise them when they were looking the other way, call their name. You know, I don't know, man. If anybody's a college student here, you might remember, you might think of, yeah, you do stuff like that. But anyway, I'd have just clocked him. Lord, where are you going? I'd have been like, you idiot. Come over here for a second. Let me tell you, we're going, pop! You know, that's where I'm going, you idiot. Come on. I've been telling you. I'm in my last hour, buddy. Jesus answered him, where I'm going, you cannot follow. You know, Jesus is so sanctified. Oh, come on, Peter. Where I'm going, you cannot follow me now. But you will follow me later. Boy, if Peter had known the meaning of those words, he might have kept his mouth shut. I'm going to the cross. I'm going to die. You can't go with me now because nobody can die for the sins of the world. Only I can do that. Hey, but Peter, guess what? You have a special honor. You're going to suffer too. Don't you dare think for a second that following Jesus is all roses. If we follow him, if we mirror the cross, we will suffer. We will. It's a part of our lives. You will follow afterwards. And Peter says to him, Lord, why can't I not follow you now? You know, this goes back to the same, I think, self-righteous, earning God's favor heart Peter had when he said, you will never wash my feet, Jesus. And Jesus has to go, Peter, if I don't serve you, you don't belong to me. You cannot serve me. You cannot die for me. You can't do anything. You got nothing to offer my team. You got no skills and talents that I need. I own it all. No human hands serve me. Nothing. I serve you, Peter. You will die. But it won't because you're serving me. It's because I put you in motion to reflect me. And Peter goes, why can't I follow you now? Because I want to do something for you now. I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus answered and said, will you lay down your life for me? I love how he just says the phrase right back to him. Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, amen and amen. I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. And that's grace. And let me tell you why. There is no chapter 21 of John when Jesus, after the resurrection, sits with John and says, John, do you love me? And he goes, you know that I love you. And he goes, then feed my lambs. And he goes, no, John, Peter, do you love me? And Peter goes, you know that I love you. And he goes, then take care of my sheep. And then Jesus, pushing a little harder, goes, Peter, do you love me more than these fish? They were having breakfast. And Peter goes, you know that I love you. You know all things. And he goes, good. Because you're going to suffer. You were a young man. You used to put your own clothes on. You used to do your own thing. But there's going to come a day where you will stretch out your arms and someone else will put your clothes on and they will lead you to places you do not know. And it says, and this is the phrase, it says, and all of this was to tell about the kind of death Peter would die to glorify God. To put God's greatness on display. There's no chapter 21 without a chapter 18 when Peter fails so drastically that all idea that he could serve God, that he could earn God's favor, that he had anything to offer God was smashed, where he was totally humiliated. And he looked into Jesus' eyes the last time he denied him and went away weeping. There's no chapter 21, and there's no service from Peter until Peter is broken of any idea that he doesn't need grace, and he doesn't need Jesus to serve him. There's this powerful quote by Crawford Loretz, and I'm going to close with this. James and the team can come back up here. And Crawford Loretz is a pastor, and he said, I've seen this at work in my own life, especially during the early years of my ministry. He goes, I really thought I had a lot to offer to the cause of Christ. So God introduces us to the cure for pride, and I would say self-righteousness. A series of circumstances in which we get acquainted with pain and our own inadequacies. Pride is proprietary. It wants to own what belongs to God. Every time Peter said, you can't wash my feet, and I will die for you, and I'll serve you, and I'll go where you're going. Every time, what he was really, really doing, though he didn't know it was, he was saying, I'm better. I can do it. I'm going to get a little glory here. I'm not going to miss out on the glory. And that's self-righteous pride. It keeps us from accepting the grace of God and the gospel of Jesus. Brokenness is God's way of showing us that he owns our lives and he gets the glory for what he does through us. Because see, it's all about his glory. It's all about his beauty. It's all about him. And the coolest thing about that is that we're invited into his story. The coolest thing is everything he did both to make himself famous and to make us a family and to put us in motion. Because his fame is our joy. His glory is our peace. His gospel is our salvation. And everything else is going to burn up. Everything else. And Jesus sits in a room with us this morning. And he says, I served you. I touch the dirtiest parts of you. I see them, I know them, and I touch them. I work in it, and I work in and around it. And I see you don't get it all the time, Chuck. That's okay, you're kind of stubborn. Harry calls me out. He says I'm a bull. I don't know what that means. All right, got a hard head. It's cool. You're self-righteous. I'm going to break you down a little bit. It's going to hurt worse than somebody else, you know. The other people, they get it. You know, Barbara, she's just broken. She's just following Jesus. But you're an idiot, Chuck, so I'm going to hurt you till you get it. And you can be there if you want. But one way or another, whether it's in this life or at the end, you will see that it was all about Jesus. And you will see that it was all for his glory. And you will see that the only joy and peace to be had on planet Earth was rooted in the cross. And all community, all real community that we could have is rooted in mirroring and being a mirror for the way he loved and he served us. And so this morning, I want to challenge us. Do we accept the grace of Jesus this morning? Do we rest in it? I think there's some people right now, there are some things that in your self-righteous pride, you hang on to. You use it to beat yourself up sometimes. It's shameful. You don't tell anybody about it. You won't let it go because you've got to make yourself feel bad so that you feel better. Jesus says that you need to accept grace. Do you accept his purpose? Do you accept that he holds all authority and that he's working for your good? Those are the things that I think this morning our hearts need to chase after. The cross is where we see Jesus. The question is, do we let what we see put us in motion?